welcome to the Frito Show. Ragnhild, welcome.
Tack, Frito.
Finally, we managed. Took us 10 years, we found out today.
Well, stuff has been brewing.
Yes. Yeah, because the first time we talked about this was in 2013 then.
I think so. I remember it from a space run by Siri Leira and Inger Lund called Percival Space.
Yes.
I don't remember exactly the situation, but I remember you bringing a sound recorder, and I think you had already made some podcasts at the time.
I was pretty maybe that one or two, because the first one I did with Jonathan Brewer, which I later took over Percival Space with to start Demon's Mouth. But I thought you were involved with a Percival Space as well, or were you just involved in the sideline, or how did that work?
How did that work? More like a sideline. Inger at the time lived in Berlin, so she crashed at my place several times going there. And I did some performances and readings there.
Yeah.
But I didn't partake in the organization or running of the space.
But were you running a space at the time there? Somewhere before that or after?
No, but I were part of running the open forum lecture series at the Art Academy for 2 years.
Yes. Brilliant. So, I've known your work since almost as long. I think we showed you Demon's Mouth at some point too.
Yeah, you meant to include me in this kind of strange, quite nice side program you were doing. But then I sort of just showed up and made it into a solo show.
Yeah. But that was perfectly fine. Yeah. And I think Jonathan took you also to Market, right? A supermarket in Stockholm?
Yes, and then also the space in New York.
What was that? I don't remember which one as well.
It was quite. I think both of those times I showed some of these huge collages printed on like a flag mesh. That is possible to. Somehow they look a bit like this screen in front of the microphone. Only they are large, soft, made for outdoor use, very sturdy.
Because I remember at the time you were playing with these kind of. Isn't that the material they use in stands or on fairs, like advertising, like?
It made a lot of sense to bring it to supermarkets in Stockholm. This side fair to the big market fair.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where. Could you describe it? Do you still have it in your head, or is it? Yeah, you brought there.
They were. I mean, they are coming from like a series of work I'm making where I combine researching into text materials that blooms sort of into a performance.
Yes.
But then there's a separate side where I'm also doing image research, which then becomes these collages. They are a way of organizing the information.
Yeah.
And both the textual information and the image information are somehow interlinked.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because I wanted to get to this.
So these were about somehow the powers of metaphors and taking the example of bikes.
Bikes?
Bikes. Yeah, bikes.
Bike as a metaphor or as a...
Well, the very long-winded kind of bad title which I'm now trying to remember, which was to think with the wrong metaphor is as easy as riding a bike with the wrong frame size.
I love
it's
it.
Badly translated from Norwegian to English, but approximately.
But it catches the kind of the atmosphere of the No, I like that a lot. So because I know your I know your inspiration comes a lot from text and thinking and so the image part wasn't so I wasn't too familiar with, but Where does that come from? Would that kind of that search for, I know, for meaning? Let's put it in a small question.
Yeah, that's a very small question. Well, I've been very. I think we all are, right? The human brain is somehow wired for constructing meaning, not constructing truth. Or you're sort of like a meaning machine, not a truth machine.
Yes.
And this has been also so obviously tantalizing, especially maybe back 10 years ago when... 10 years ago, I wouldn't say that we were still naive about the internet or the capacities of search engines and so on. But it was slightly different still
it
from
was
what it is today.
pre-AI at least, and it was pre...
Yeah, well, the AIs were very basic somehow. I did while I stayed in Berlin for like half a year or so, I was working with this search engine optimized text as a side job to just gain some money.
Yeah.
So we were writing texts aimed at search engines to make them sort of based on the way they were operating at the time to make sure that you got the most hits on that type of like blue pants, for instance. And so there was a system of how to write for the machine so the machine would find it. Although it should look like it was written for humans by humans.
Do
Do
you remember what the tricks were back then?
A certain amount of keywords to be repeated a certain amount of times with enough difference per sentence so that it didn't look mechanic.
Yeah. And so do you remember an example?
No,
that's maybe too long ago or
it's too specific because it was like very small. It was a high amount of text. This is a kind of like very low paid work, small humans sitting there writing for machines, but it would be a repetition of like a brand name and the type of sartorial object, for instance, and some other elements.
How do you get that job? How do you get into that? Because you were living in Berlin at the time,
it was after the art academy, and I had done a residency in Beijing, and I was gonna do a residency in Detroit. But there was a gap time
weren't we there at the same time in Detroit, or were you after? Because that was at Alejandra.
It was Alejandra and Aaron's place,
right?
The Institute for New Connotative Action.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think you.
No, I think you were
at the
after.
same time.
Yeah, we were before. Anyways, we'll get back to Detroit after.
No, but we are still talking about
let's go back to Berlin,
meaning, isn't we? So, but there was this very interesting experience at the time, how to create meaning and who are you writing for if you are writing this for machines, but it's supposed to look like human writing, and at the same time you have this. When you are translating, sometimes it's hard to find the precise word.
Yes.
And you can drop it in an image search, and you search for it, and that sometimes this gives you a better answer than what a dictionary or a equal.
I will try that out.
Does so, but there's also a lot of strangeness appearing in these searches, and like say 10 years ago this strangeness seemed more tantalizing and not so shaped as it does today. Because
all these kings, probably due to like the improvement of the systems, have been kind of taken out, all the weirdness.
And there's a lot of it's maybe more obviously these sort of dark forest spaces today where you cannot access the information unless you're already logged in behind the walls.
Behind the walls,
While 10 years ago stuff was still more open or not so well managed.
Cool.
So you can really without being able to give like concrete examples, I can say that there's the feeling of like a different texture somehow. That today it's the answers are too good on the strange questions, or the images that come out is too similar,
point on, or
too correct, too similar. A lot of you find sometimes the strangeness still appearing in these websites like Kommune Norge are using, or like maybe like a fan group of bird watchers or something, like these small specific groups that are still.
They made a website 20 years ago, and they still have that same thing. Yeah, it's still out there. Yeah. No, I find that also a lack in all these algorithms and systems is that it just feeds you more of the same, and it doesn't open up for surprises or for giving you what you want to discover. If you understand what I mean. Like,
I guess you come there hoping to be slightly surprised.
Yes.
And not only confirmed.
Yeah. And I felt a small shift in that lately, that is happening a bit more. Like TikTok has been compared to fentanyl, like online fentanyl. Like it's so addictive. The systems are so good that you kind of keep on scrolling, right? Yeah, what do you think? Will these systems surpass us, and that we're just going to be sucked into the maelstrom? And
I think this is actually like a class question. If you don't train awareness about the use of it and how to go about it, then this maelstrom effect is probably quite strong.
Yeah.
But I see it perhaps even stronger working out on, say, my parents' generation.
Yeah, because they don't have the defenses, because they didn't grow up like in their formative years with these systems, so they're just kind of I see the same thing.
And it's very. I mean, like they are very. The screens are very different from having the radio running in the background. Right? It consumes your attention in a very different way.
Yeah, they don't have. Yeah. No, I see the same thing. Yeah. No, because I'm just wondering also kind of when these systems become so sophisticated that they can control what you call a class difference. When they kind of develop that class difference, so they can erode that consciousness, or they can erode that kind of awareness.
I think I was reading a book called The Diamond World, I think, by Neil Stevenson some years ago. And in this world, there's a new feudalism happening.
Yeah.
There are some huge brands that now operate as nations.
Yes.
And the wealthy people are having like a hard... anything that's handmade, anything that's tailored, these things they are deeply into. While all the sort of like industrial produced, it's not even that. They have now machines where they input some matter and they
extract whatever stuff.
Yeah, everything from food to clothes to mattresses and so on. So this kind of like need for things has evaporated, thereby making what is handmade, what is desirable.
Yeah.
And I lost my point. There was a point to this. Wait, this is about class. It's about class. So, in a way, there's probably a separate experience information being achieved by people who are using TikTok. A kind of like connectedness to what is going on in that sphere. But at the same time, I imagine that there is, if this is all you have, if you don't have any of the other things that you don't even perhaps know about, these other ways of
obtaining information, obtaining entertainment, obtaining anything.
And that type of difference, as well as of course whatever the control of the information flow also creates.
No, I find it highly fascinating and a bit scary, but in the end it will show us what we're made of. Or not. Yeah,
but then, I mean, humans, cyborgs, like how much does our tool shape us? How much did they already shape us?
Yeah. Do you take these considerations in your art? Or do you take...
I think they are sort of ongoing interests to look into, but they're more like a kind of like background or like a stratum that I can dig into from time to time. It's
the
sort
stream
of there.
that runs next to it, and you kind of dip a cup in now and again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're. Let's before we go to Detroit and Beijing, let's go to your recent exhibition at Kunstnerforbundet. It's a really nice show, and could you just quickly describe it? Is that possible, or if
would you like the sort of like objective description of it?
Maybe start with that, and then maybe after that, the more kind of what it's about, or what thoughts were, or the inspiration, or
So my exhibition at Kunstnerforbundet, its Norwegian title was Steinhard Mjelk, while the English one would be Rock Hard Milk.
Yeah.
And it contained a series of new works, large sculpture of wood with some hand-carved ornaments on it. That was around 7 meters in length and 240 in height.
Yeah.
And there was a series of reliefs carved into rubber.
Yeah.
And a series of soaps that were salt scrub soaps.
Yeah.
Cast in the shape of a cow's tongue.
Yeah.
And so it's about 40 centimeters long, 15
and
wide, and
they
so
were
on.
displayed in these kind of
They were displayed
market
in,
cases, or they have on markets, or in fish stores, or
also in meat. It's called it's kind of like näringsmiddel.
Yeah, it's like these plastic
boxes.
containers.
They have the kallenavn. They're sort of like
pet name.
Pet name.
Pet name.
Yeah. It's called Gilde kasser.
Yeah.
Gilde being like the largest
meat producer
in Norway.
Yeah.
But they were displayed in these, and one of them were also mounted on the wall of the restroom of Kunstnerforbundet on the first floor. Yeah.
As to be used.
To
right?
be used. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Sample to test.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A sample to test. Yeah. Yeah, so there was this huge boat-like structure, wooden structure in the middle, and then there were a couple of pieces on the wall, and the reliefs. No, where were they again?
They were from black rubber.
Yeah.
On the wall, and they contained images of various types of perspective, ranging from the central perspective and the grid to the Skilana gig, which is a figure called the Witch on the Wall that you can find on several medieval buildings, mainly churches.
Yeah.
Like a smiling woman displaying her genitals.
Yeah. That's this. Yeah. Iconic kind of metaphoric.
A very nice counterpoint to the central perspective.
Yeah.
The boat was a bench. It was a stage. You could
walk over. It was almost a catwalk, almost. Yeah.
It did also look a bit like a catwalk. And the second floor at Kunstnerforbundet is a very peculiar space.
Yeah.
Super nice, with all these kind of like portals and openings.
Yeah.
And the largest one was then sort of the framework that the boat was somehow blocking, or you have to somehow go onto the boat.
Yeah, because it went from one space to the other. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
And these rubber reliefs were placed on above each of these openings.
Yeah.
So there were 7 of them, corresponding to each opening.
Yeah. So there were like 3 parts of the installation: the tongues, the rubber, and the boat.
Yes, but in addition, I also invited another artist to bring in an art piece, Miriam Hansen.
Was that the one you had the lecture with? Or?
No,
Okay,
that was someone else. We'll
get
talk
to
about that later.
Yeah.
Miriam Hansen has been doing this research into transformative states and do-it-yourself culture, which is somehow linked to my way of finding information on the internet, but also completely her own way of doing it.
But that was the connection why you invited her, or?
Well, I was already very interested in two herbs that you find in the great outdoors. The one being the groblad, which English name.
That's very tricky with these plant names.
Yeah,
They're so completely different.
But it has a very interesting English name. It's called the white man's footstep, or something like this.
Okay.
Because they spread super easily.
Yeah.
And they get stuck. The
on the
seeds
foot.
of them get stuck to your
feet,
foot, and you can see them. You can see them grow out of even asphalt roads. But they also have strong healing capacities, which are interesting. So they are antibacterial. They don't have anything to do with. Now I have like this
language block.
Language block.
Yeah.
It's not antibiotica.
No.
It's not antibiotics. So it's not this line of
so
of healing. It's a different line of healing, but it still works. It's said to work.
Yeah.
And then there is the porsling, which is a type of. It's called heather.
I don't know that one.
Well, on the moors, there is small kind of shrubs that have small flowers and
that
scents
flowers
and so on.
Yeah.
But the porsling
Lyng.
has a
Lyng.
very
Is that
lyng.
like it's the same like this
It's like
Rheinlav or something type kind of thing?
They are leafy plants, but they're very small.
Yeah.
They used to be part of the brewing before hops got introduced in Norwegian context.
Yeah.
And they also sort of scares away bugs.
So a repellent. Bug repellent.
So I was interested in these things, and this connects back to Miriam because she has been working with various herbs to invoke this kind of like strange states.
Yeah.
And I wanted to invite her to bring one of these pieces to the exhibition.
That was the piece with the smell and the dust and not the dust. I mean the vapor. It's a
vapor. I mean like it's a scent diffuser or like a air humidifier.
Yeah.
My only input into her process was that she used the groblad and the porsling into it. With this kind of like healing capacities, but at the same time, it's not. The posh is known to create headaches, quite like strong headaches.
Yeah.
So they have like a very nice aromatic scent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they create headaches and they scare away bugs.
Huh.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyway,
it's interesting with these health thing.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of like also. I mean, like, does it work? Does it have to work?
Yeah, I worked a bit with that in my final year show at the academy as well, because in Germany there are these huge. They're called Gardierbauten. This is these buildings like constructions which are 100 meter long, about 10 meter high. Stacks of twigs, and then they pump up this salted water out of the ground, and they kind of run it through, and it gets this mist, and it's very good for your lungs and stuff like that. And so I used kind of a version of that in the final year show. I think it's super fascinating if you take these ephemeral, smell and vapor, which is a not a very common material to use in art that often.
Perhaps not, but it also feels like there's something about the time-based quality of this vapors coming into the space that was very important. It also got like a rhythm to follow the exhibition. And it was actually put on the carpet that we are sitting on now.
Oh yeah. So we're taking in the vapes again.
Well, but that is somehow the final object of the exhibition, which is coming out of a process with a group that I'm part of, which we are calling Infopsin.
Again?
Infopsin.
Infopsin.
Yes. Think about information and opsins. Opsins are stuff on your retina that transforms light into information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called a scan point carpet. We've been doing performances where we also do digital scans of the architecture of the space where we are performing.
Yeah.
And you put up a tripod, and the scanner details the entire space. You get a 3D model out of it. But the element just below where the tripod stands,
it
doesn't know what it is, so it fills in information based on the other environment. So you get this kind of strange, weird, completely imagined fields that are corresponding somehow to where you are. So you can get this kind of like one-to-one placement of these points in the real space where you did the scanning.
So
you get like a strange slippage between these worldly environments that are different but similar.
And that kind of relates a bit kind of your theme of this. Now I lost my point.
But there's information and meaning.
Exactly. How information is, what we talked about earlier, kind of which keywords you use and the glitches that appear and kind of the meaning that kind of arises from that. If I summarize that correctly.
I would say yes. I mean, I think it's unlikely that one knows everything about one's own practice. The interesting things about conversations such as this is also like discovery, or like seeing it mirrored back to you, and like
No, and as soon as you kind of make a small conclusion or a thought about your practice, kind of it moves on again, and you move away from it again, which is also nice. So that was the practical description of the work, and then you had this talk there as well. And I didn't get the whole talk because I unfortunately had to leave before, and I came later. But it was related to feminism, partly.
Tell me what you think.
Because I thought I thought it was, it's the same as this blind spot. So I came in too late, so I didn't get the introduction, kind of the theme kind of framework, and I didn't get the conclusion either. So I only get this middle part, and that was as a patchwork or unclarity or something for me, which I found interesting because I didn't understand it. And I think that's always an interesting starting point. But could you? I mean, it was a. Because as I remember, there were like several perspectives in the text, and somebody commenting on like a movement, or there were several layers at least that were intertwined.
It was a kind of a small finissage talk and reading between myself and Marte Ram Fortun, who's also a Norwegian artist working with performance and text, but she's also a professor at the Art Academy here in Oslo. And we were looking at the text by an Italian artist from the late 1970s, and I'm not gonna try to say her name because I know I will not manage, but maybe we can add it in the podcast
just send me and I can put
the first part of the title of the text is on negative capability in women's art. And I was interested in the text because it appeared during my work towards this exhibition. So it didn't. It wasn't a starting point for the exhibition, but I stumbled upon it while working on the exhibition. And I wanted to somehow include it or take it up. And one element with the public reading that I enjoy a lot is that you get to go into the depths of text, which you may otherwise just skim through.
You just read it and put it aside.
And with the different experiences of the different people participating, they will always see different parts that maybe are invisible to you, or they see it in a different light, and so on. So this was basically what we were doing. We were going through it paragraph by paragraph.
Because it was a very dense text that I remember, and
super dense, and also changing in format in a peculiar way that became very interesting in the end. She's going into these large capitals, like shouting, but kind of. But she's trying to say that the outset is somehow that you are in a difficulty because you are going into a strange tradition for the production of objects, and according to her, it seems that it's impossible to go into it without recognizing this. It's also impossible to try to re-establish previous ways of making things that has been tagged on to women as a kind of like essential connection, and try to sort of like how do you say, reinstate that as a art to itself. That she's saying something that there needs to be a kind of like middle way or something different, but then she begins with this shouting text because she is unable, it seems, to describe exactly or find out or figure out what it is. But this sounds, it's more complicated than that. But it's quite interesting to think about the reception of feminist thinkers into the art field, and how heavily it's been leaning on American feminism instead of the
European
various types of European. And the feminism and the thinking about class and interconnected with feminism in Italy is very different, for instance, from the one you find in the Anglo-American world.
Of course. So how did you stumble upon that text? How did that kind of catch your attention in that?
I think I came across it in a text by Denise Ferreira da Silva, who's a thinker of various positions of feminism that's trying to make it more complicated. But I haven't been able to figure out exactly where.
Okay.
So I might basically be misremembering it. But I'm very happy that I found it. It was also quite difficult to come by. There was no available copy.
No.
So it actually appeared after asking an internationally known art writer who
had it in his collection, or
she had it in her collection, but I knew because she had been searching for it like vocally on Twitter before, and then at the end got it. We also figured out that it was actually simply if it was originally in Italian, it's a translation that is only partial, because there are elements of the text that are not included. So it would be very interesting to find the original.
That's interesting,
And also to understand if these large capitals, are they a choice by the translator or like what happened. It was published in Art International, I think, in 1979. So in this English translation.
And then it was a translation, and then it could be I mean, in the stress of printing, it could be anything. So how much? So did you pick these themes? I mean, you can pick them for several reasons. Do you pick them because of the oddity angle, or the kind of what did kind of catch your attention in that text? What problem or something resonated most with you, or which?
Well, the title is very evocative, isn't it? Like the negative capability. What is a negative capability? There is something about that word that makes me think that there is a space for a kind of like anger and resistance and disappointments and rage of different sorts. Right? But maybe it makes more sense to talk about like I was thinking now about the since you brought up the old flag collages and its work on metaphors. I was thinking about the images I worked with for the rubber reliefs that were looking at this kind of like model notions of perspective of different types. And there's something, of course, an interest in this, how these models also take part in shaping what is resulting, or like what information are you locating and so on.
Yeah. Also, so the metaphorical strength of that title kind of caught you, and then you got into it, and because
and then it's sort of like continuous. You begin to just pull the threads and trying to figure out.
Because the parts of text I read, there was this frustration integrated in this text, or this kind of I don't know, not able to grasp, or kind of being this undirectedness, or.
But it's like a terrible, also like a terrible feeling, I guess, because you are what you do with it. It's a very like it's a super weak position. It sort of just unravels itself.
Yeah.
Instead of getting anywhere.
I mean, that's probably also why the text is so hard to get, because it
might be because is it a bad text? Is it interesting? And does it mean anything today? These are also questions I think it's interesting to think about when picking up an older text.
So back to the work itself. So that was the practical description, and so where did your thought process start with that project, or with that exhibition?
You used the metaphor or like the description earlier in our conversation about these how these kind of like various research interests are simply there, and you dip your cup into it, but you need a situation for doing it. So for my part, it sort of started with the space of Kunstnerforbundet. I have been working with various carpets, like the one we are sitting on, or also doormats, or like these elements that you brush your feet off when entering a space, or passing through a door. And I was still very interested in the doors, or these kind of like portal shapes of the space. And there is a tradition called supraporter, which is the elements above the doors. And you have a painting tradition where there used to be made prospective paintings of the cityscape that was hung above the doors. So when you were exiting, you would see an image of the city above you, but often seen as when arriving from a ship coming into port. So you would sort of like have a kind of,
because that would be the fullest perspective in most cities, right?
And it would also be the best way of arriving in most cities before the trains,
planes, and automobiles,
and so on, right? So I was interested in this position of a viewer about to exit through a door, but looking somehow back at themselves from the perspective of someone arriving to the city. And then there's also various how do you say this? Mythic descriptions of rituals around doorways.
Like the witch you were talking about, the witch image, or the smiling.
Yes, the Shilana gig, but I don't think that's specifically connected to doorways. It's more like an element in between all this.
But it's this secret symbolism that kind of is attached to space, and
it is. And if I remember correctly, this profusion of decorations on the churches and so on was somehow connected to the general illiteralism. How do you say this? Illiteralism?
Illiteralism, I think so, I guess.
Of the kyrkjelyd.
The church sound?
Not the church sound, but the people congregation. Is that what it's called?
Congregation.
Or like the people who are belonging to one church.
Congregation.
And somehow to you would have your preachers in Latin,
Yeah.
And you would have your
Images.
local language, and then you would have the images as a kind of like crossover.
Yeah.
On the sort of like walls, as much as on sort of canvases and so on, and carved out of the rock. So there would be like a several languages happening at once.
Yes.
So this interested me, but there's also rituals pertaining to doors all the way from sort of like small magical formulas collected in the folkloricism.
You get a whole in Asia. You got also the whole door entrance and the demons and how you keep them out and how you keep other things in. And
this also, I mean, like this is also stuff that we have.
I mean, it's the symbolic language of the inside and the outside. You know.
Yes.
The outer life, the inner life.
And there's it's a Norwegian archaeologist called Marianne Hem Eriksen who's made I think it began with a master thesis, but then she continued it in a PhD project about this archaeology of doorways.
Yes.
So this one,
I have to look into that. That sounds really interesting.
It goes into several of these layers. And one of the things she mentions is this recorded history of, we're going to talk about Vikings, about the Vikings at Volga. And who knows what to call them, but there were merchants traveling on ships down the rivers, and they were observed by... names are terrible today. They were observed, and one of their burial rituals were described, and they constructed a doorway in the middle of a field, and a woman got very drunken, and then she was held above the doorway so that she could see over it and into the underworld or the land of the dead.
That is so cool.
Helheimen. And this was described in like, was it 12th, 13th century or something?
Yeah, because that was a transition period when, like, I'm really into the stavkirke, the stave churches, and you know they are all from that time where they really where kind of the old religions were integrated into Christianity, the Christian religion, and you had this kind of dual language. You know, again, this dual language. You know, you still had the dragon style, and all the theories around that, where that came from, and how, and then.
And actually, there used to be this law that everyone had to brew beer for Christmas.
Yeah.
And if you didn't get tipsy, you were not in connection with the divine, so you had to get tipsy.
Nice. Yeah.
But it's also interesting how you have this super clever religion who is integrating elements from the old culture to make it more acceptable.
Yeah, otherwise it won't survive, right? It has to adapt a bit before. Yeah, I mean, that's why we have Christmas, because that's a combination of many rituals. And no, it's interesting.
Yeah, so and now we have these heaps of gran or furu lying in heaps in the city streets, waiting to be taken away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Such a wasteful kind of ritual. But that's a different story. So portals, doors, doorways.
Yeah, and then resulting into these series of they're super rough, these reliefs. If I should, I mean, they're not beautiful handmade objects. They're more like kind of like I don't know, black metal style way of going into it. Very rough, very raw, but yeah. I was interested in not making it precious pretty. But then somehow, so it began with the portals and began with the reliefs, and I was very interested in this above and below of the water as a place of transportation. And also how the means surrounding us for navigating the world or procuring our food or getting information and so on affects our image world or the way we make sense of things.
Yes, totally.
So today often you see water. I grew up seeing water as a boundary. Yeah. But then of course it was the big connection.
It was
the big connector
it was a pathway.
Of things.
You see it in like the coastal places, right? Where I mean, in the old days, you had a boat. You didn't have a car,
Yeah.
right? You didn't either. You had to walk for 2 hours to get to the other side, or you took the boat 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Rowing or sailing or whatnot. Yeah. So and now we use these pathways as leisure time. So if you go on the water, of course, I mean, you still use your boat a bit, but less urgent.
Yeah, and the visibility of it is so strongly now towards leisure and not necessity.
The same with sailing, right? I mean, the people who go sailing around the world, they don't do it because they need stuff from the other side of the world. They do it because of the experience or the leisure or the challenge of it.
So the big boat sculpture came about with a kind of like curiosity about the image of boats. I mean, we have them from all the way back to Bronze Age times. In the rock carvings, you find images of something that looks a bit like a boat, a bit like a bird, and it's carrying an element which is probably like sun or the moon, and it has the sort of the role of being the thing that can reconstitute the order by sort of making the day pass
repeat itself, or reoccur,
sort of like security of reoccurrence somehow.
I mean, and isn't it the Greek mythology with Hades and the underworld, and also I think Egyptian, where you could take the boat to the underworld. So there's also the it's a nice symbol, very complex.
Yeah, it's super complex, but I think also somehow to just touching it like lightly and seeing like what happens.
And especially since the boat really transformed. I mean, the boat didn't have a hull anymore, so it would sink immediately. Right?
It was very clearly not a functional boat. On the same time, it elevated whoever stepped onto it a bit above the floor.
Yes.
There was also stuff going on below it with a line of a copper tube that was running throughout from end to end and below it.
Yes.
And it had a very how do we say this? The structure was kind of set and produced very precisely, while it also had these wing elements, which you would then English words clay. You would sort of like dress these wing elements with
planks
to make a hull. So
you just had the ribs,
sort of
the
like
ribs of
the boat. That was right. And the ribs were hand drawn and then cut out by a stick sag.
By hand also.
So they were very different from these kind of like base elements that you were walking on. And they also somehow related to certain restrictions about public space in Norway. It can be a certain height until you have to have a railing or a fence. So it was just
that height. Maxing it out. Although in an art space you can get away with a bit more dangerous.
Likely.
We can live slightly more dangerous as artists than real life. But, cool. So let's jump back a bit in time and go to Detroit, because we've both been there. And I found it so fascinating. So I was just wondering kind of what your experience was there.
It was super strange. It was still this kind of like city which had completely collapsed with the various things happening in Detroit, but specifically after the financial crisis of 2008-11.
Yeah, because you like which year did you go? Do you remember? Because I don't fully remember. I think it was 2010, 11, 9, somewhere around there.
13 or 14.
13, yeah, could also be. Yeah, maybe.
No, 13 was Beijing, so it was 14.
14, yeah. I think I was there before you. Because was the library already built?
Yes.
Yeah, then I
yeah,
was
the
before
library
that. Yes.
was built.
Yeah.
No, so my experience was first is kind of like I think I never have seen so many motor highways.
Yeah.
Like did you say?
Was it your first time in the States as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was.
So that's a double whammy. Yeah.
But then, of course, you had this. I've never seen cars with so many rust marks and should this really be driving around? And I noticed that it was very uncommon to put on the front lights of the car.
Yeah.
And this also was super peculiar to me because in Norway you would always have
the light on. Yeah.
The light on.
Because you live in darkness.
So
But
somehow the cars seemed to be standing still even though they were driving because they didn't have the lights on.
Yeah, but this is something in the Netherlands too. You know, I think they might change it now. But before then, during the day, you wouldn't have your lights on.
Yeah.
So that's just a policy thing, I think.
Yeah.
And,
but it's very peculiar and like one of the first things I noticed.
Yeah. One thing I really noticed is that even though you were driving a car, people were keeping. I mean, when people were sitting on the porch and you were driving by, they would kind of notice you. So there was there was a connection between like people outside of the cars and inside the cars, and this comes, as I understood, comes from kind of most of these neighborhoods are quite dangerous, so you better keep your eyes out. So if there's like so this I found it very peculiar, kind of how this information, like in Norway or in Europe, mainly kind of the cars ignore the walkers and the walkers ignore the cars, right? And it goes kind of works separate because each has their zone kind of to even
as long as everyone stops
bikers,
at the same right time.
And all are frustrated, but they can't about each other, but they can't kind of put their minds in each other's places, you know.
Yeah.
And while there was a synergy between that, or there was like a different type of overview, which was much wider than we're used to. I thought that was very fascinating. Yeah. And I noticed it like several places, different places in several different situations where there was like a different dynamics there.
Of course, it was also like the other peculiarities about the Detroit city, which is widely documented, or quite widely documented at the time, I think. But it was somehow already changing in 2013-14. Yeah. There was a lot of money coming back into town. You would have all these kind of like microbreweries with the hipster bars.
One experience I had there was when we went to the waste disposal, which was the coolest experience ever, because this guy, because there was no waste disposal, so this guy just set it up himself. And he had like graffiti on the wall, and they were playing music, and it was a meeting place. You know, it was a meeting. It wasn't like, okay, you go separate your trash, but you know, you went there with all your trash and you separated yourself, and there was somehow a community aspect to it there, which was quite novel to me, I thought, and was quite interesting. And that was kind of part of that. This movement of, okay, we have to solve it ourselves because there's no systems in place. So if we want our garbage to be picked up, we have to organize it ourselves. Or you know, there was like different energy there. I think
maybe you have been there while it was still kind of like more of this hopeful energy. I felt that at the time I came, that people were sort of quite annoyed at the money coming in and the decisions being made above their head about the things that they have been protecting and taking care of.
I think I was at the same. I mean, I was maybe half a year before you, so it wasn't that big a difference, I think. So, and because there was already this because people were losing their ownership of the processes, right?
Yeah.
Which is when the big capital comes in and the coffee shops, you know, pop up and
and it became obvious that someone had been buying a property and leaving it to decompose, and then would smash everything down and build up something.
No, but it is very strange to see a city in evaporation state or in
and also like the so pronounced difference from block to block. Was there. And I had never seen fireflies before.
Oh.
So this was also the first time I saw fireflies. And
cool.
And I've seen
you
fireflies
were in summer,
represent. Or May, June,
early summer.
July-ish. There were, but this presence of fireflies that I've seen so many times represented. Drawings, videos, and so on. And then you are there, and they're sort of like in your hand.
Oh, wow.
It's very different.
That's a powerful experience. Yeah. It's funny how such small thing.
Yeah.
And you did a full residence? Like, were you there a month or two, or?
2 months.
2 months,
as far as I remember. And I was working on some drawings and scarves. They became a series of scarves. I was very much into extreme portability at the time. So.
Yeah, because I remember also, to go back to these banners, because that had also something with that portability. I remember you were talking about that, where this kind of this flexibility of bringing it on a plane to somewhere, and I like that kind of. Yeah, that these restrictions inform like an art practice, because it always does. Even if you don't admit it, it does. But I think it's an interesting tool and especially because probably also because you did Beijing before that, that pushed it that direction maybe as well.
I think so. It's also the time period where I didn't have a studio after graduating from the art academy.
Yeah.
And then when I came back to Oslo again in like 2015 or so, I got a studio situation through working with Podium and Ayat Tuleubek and Ignas Krunglevikus. And the space we were running for.
You're still running Podium, right?
No, since we all became parents, we have done a generational takeover, or like a. Which is very it's frightening and exciting and a bit but it's going well, and it was very interesting to sort of be able to give them the space with the budget for 2 years.
Wow.
So now
that's a big gift.
This year they will have a new application to Kulturrådet, but it sort of also connects to this interest we had in how the conversations we were having with the artists while running Podium would also be like a somehow the cherry, or like what was the most interesting part of it for us.
That conversation,
the conversations, and somehow to be able to, because what was becoming very obvious after having left the art academy, the first years you are simply very happy to be out.
Yes.
And then to not have to explain yourself. But then after some small time you begin, I think, missing the conversations and this.
And we talked about it before the podcast.
Art.
That's how I started the podcast, because I was missing these conversations. I was missing kind of the, this meandering conversation about art and what it means and where we go with it and
the strange overlaps and interests and suddenly the artists one knows about and the other one doesn't.
No, I found it also when I was running Demon's Mouth with Jonathan, that he brought artists in, I brought artists in, and that moment to kind of get to know them, to really dive into someone's work, while doing a show with them, it's a different dynamic, and it's super rich. It's super interesting to get that closeness, because you don't get that otherwise, or it's very seldom that you get access to a moment like that.
And in several other areas there will be a different type of interest that is propelling you.
And this is also what I found out, because I got being a parent a bit earlier than you. But at that time, your time is just more constricted. And when people come from abroad and they're here for a week, the only way how you get a conversation with them is put a microphone in their face, and then you have their undivided attention for the time being. And otherwise, there's like, they have to meet them, and then and you're which is also nice, the social part. But as a parent, you have less time for these frivolous kind of. Explorations of time, let's say, like that.
I guess especially when you are two artist parents,
which makes it double trouble. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, because so before Beijing, let's switch chaotically to Podium, because you were running Podium for 4 years.
We've been running it from 2015 to 2020, early 21.
Yeah, just before Corona then.
No,
Just,
through
was that
Corona.
Through Corona, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's almost 5 years then, yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant, yeah. Yeah, so what
But Podium existed for a long time before
Podium
this as well. It's been sort of interesting to be part of, in part because it's been a kind of generational space, or it's managed to survive switching between generations.
Yeah, which is very unique. Yeah, because it becomes a thing on its own, and people can attach and detach. Yeah.
Which is, I think, very unique. But it's also, of course, connected to the house where we are now in Hausmania, and the long-term contract that
exists there
has been able to have. And then the big thing we changed were sort of making it as tidier so that we could secure support from the art council. Yeah,
because you also physically you kind of renovated the place. I remember in the start, and make it just give it a fresh face in the start. It felt like a fresh start, because it was. I mean, Podium has been around as long as I've been here at least, and I don't even know when it started.
Well, someone says 2001, someone says 2003. I think 2001, the floors came in.
Yeah, so 2002. Let's stay in the middle. Yeah, so it's been around since I've been here, and but spaces go through phases. Right?
Yeah, and it has been different things as well. It used to be more towards stage arts, and then navigated towards contemporary visual arts, and the program we were running were a combination of mostly solo exhibitions by very young, unestablished artists. Often their first major solo.
Yeah, no, it's a very important platform.
And some more established international artists, and lectures, reading groups.
Yeah. No, I really remember you really revitalized the space, because I mean, I think Ayat, he just graduated from the academy around that time, and who was the third person again? Ignas, yeah. I don't think I know him too well, but
Before us there was Snorre Vamen, and Ignas was working with him for a while. So Ignas is sort of like the generational link.
Yeah, that's the chain link. Yeah. So, and now you've given it to the next. Who is it running now again?
We gave the keys to Lesia Vasilenko, and she has then invited more people to work.
Yeah, so she's the link for the next generation.
And nice. Lesia was, of course, working with us in 2019, 2020. Also doing her amazing Struktura Time program. So she has a lot of curatorial experience. It's going to be interesting to see what
she's going to do. Nice. Brilliant. All right, so last thing, maybe talk a bit about Beijing, because I'm just interested. Yes. So let's start. Okay, it's probably your first time in Asia, right?
Yes, it was. It was actually my first intercontinental flight. Only it's not, because we are in Eurasia, but it was like a long flight.
Yes. Yeah. So just getting off the plane, let's start there. You get off the plane, doors open. What happened?
Well, on a silly path, I had a kind of infection, so I had a fever, and I was very scared that I wouldn't be allowed inside.
Oh wow!
So I had taken like a Paracet and just like
pretended to be.
But it was so it was sort of like smooth, but quite hazy in this kind of like infection.
What kind of airport is Beijing? Is that I've never been there, but is it like modern? Is it like 20 years old? Is it like 100 years old?
It felt very. It was after the Olympics.
Yeah, so it was
everything
super
was
shiny.
Everything was sort of like large and super shiny.
Yeah.
it's dimensioned for a lot more people than what, for instance, Oslo Gardermoen is. So there was like a dimensional shift happening, and I remember this kind of strange scaling. That you have this enormous amounts of buildings and people, but then you have your sort of like a small focus. Here,
which you can manage.
Which is super, it's interesting.
Because where were you staying in Beijing? Was it?
It was in a district.
It was through OCA, right?
It was through the Office for Contemporary Art. It was called Platform China in Beijing.
But it only exists for a couple of years, right?
It didn't last for such a long time. But I was so happy to be able to go there. The program in itself was more like being dropped into a situation where you had like a space and not really. I mean, like you got some invitations, but mainly you were on your own.
You were on your own, yeah.
And that suited me very well at the time. Just sort of like taking in this kind of like shock of being in such a place.
And a completely different culture. And what kind of neighborhood was it? Was it like a residential neighborhood, industrial?
It was
combination businesses, stores.
But it was a bit outside. I mean, it wasn't in the main city. It was a bit outside by this 798 district. But then again, also a bit outside of that, so you could bike to the 798 district.
And what does that mean? 798 district.
It was an area of Beijing that was, in the early 2000s, became like the kind of like hub of contemporary art.
Okay,
So you have the galleries there basically, and some artist studios of various kinds. But all the international galleries were
centered there somehow.
But it's all outside of the main city.
But I imagine that Beijing is like this conglomerate. That word, like a
conglomerate.
That one.
Would say, but so it's kind
of like cities,
imperial palace
within cities,
and then it sort of goes on. No, so this was
the 789th city.
I mean, where to begin? I want to go back. And also like, I mean, I wouldn't want to backpack really anywhere, but perhaps in China.
I would really like to go there. It sounds like I'm super obsessed with Hong Kong at the moment, with Kowloon Walled City, which was torn down in the 90s, but which was this part, when it was still British rule there. There was this small neighborhood which still belonged to China. So it was this no man's land, because the Chinese kind of rule couldn't reach it, and the English rule doesn't have a say in there. So it kind of turned into this city of darkness, where no rules, no nothing, and it kind of turned into the most dense population of the world at some time. There were like, I think at the height there were around 50,000-60,000 people living in one block, like one like block, and they were building just without any code or anything on top of each other, with patchwork electrical systems, water systems, and criminal systems and whatnot. And I know I've been completely obsessed by that for the last couple of years. So, but this aesthetic is very Asian as well. Like they're, I think you find it in Beijing as well. This kind of slumish kind of, where rules don't really touch or penetrate. Where I don't know.
In a way, I was so surprised at how seemingly orderly, but very anarchist in output or in sort of like intention. A lot of the people were. I also think that our image of Asia, coming from Northwest, is very formed by stuff like Blade Runner, the sort of like this notion of the future somehow as being the aesthetics of what's going on in Asia.
Yeah.
And for my own part, my interest has sort of began with playing video games as a child.
Yeah.
Picking up on this kind of aesthetics of like a different rhythm of aesthetics and a different tonality of, and so on. So somehow being pulled towards that.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. And also, you want to go back, yeah. And how long were you there? 2 months, 3 months as well?
That was a 3 month stay.
Yeah. That's a nice period because then you have time to arrive, time to
sort of process a bit and then actually begin making some stuff. I think I was working on the stuff for Demon's Mouth while I was there.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, because I was shortly
came out of that.
Yeah,
including like a.
Did your work take a big shift around there, or that influence, or that compactness? Or
but this is sort of like also connects to this traveling.
Mobility
and not having a studio space, so not wanting to sort of like work with heavy materials that you then have to find an expensive way of transporting. And not to necessarily reduce it to like a logic of logistics and economy. But it also sets like a framework of what
possibilities and
where your interest is pointed somehow, because your concern is about this kind of like jumping between places more than being in one place and being then tempted perhaps to work with more time-consuming heavy processes.
But how did it inform your kind of dipping in your river, let's say, like that kind of what kind of did you have to change your approach critically at that point, or did you just have to adjust it a bit? You know what I mean? Kind of your approach to making work.
I think this continuity between working with language and working with images began forming there. Because I had been working with this like search engine poems. Yeah. But at this time, I began to pick up more about the images as well. Yeah. This kind of like strangeness happening there.
Yeah, because I'll try to summarize it. So before Beijing, mainly text. Out of the text, the works emerged, and then after that, the images kind of started.
I think so.
Participating as well.
Yeah, in a more involved way.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, so it added a layer of richness to your research or to your
but also perhaps like a way of being or finding a shape to allow for these kind of like associative jumps.
Yes.
That I make, but it works very poorly in language often.
Yes.
While in images it's
slightly
much easier to include it without losing a kind of feeling of a thread.
And I also see the connection, as you talk about metaphors, right? A metaphor in language is very complex. A metaphor in image is super easy, right? And I think that tension between that space in between those two is maybe where you try to formulate something which is, I think, quite novel. Does that make sense?
I'm sort of like I think this was a compliment. Thank you.
Just take it.
Thank you.
No, because I see your work as quite dense, right? And it's work that doesn't open itself. You have to work for it to kind of dig into it, and you have to kind of, as you do your research as well, where you kind of pull it out of the, this Italian depth or wherever you get it from, you pull it out, and so you have to dig a bit in there, and then and that's how we end up in between image and language, maybe, or somewhere. Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and because Yeah, no, I'm trying to picture the approach or the direction or the flavor. Yeah. So Beijing, and then no, I think that's the reason why I ask because these big shifts in perspective, physical perspective. They of course have an impact. So I was just wondering how aware that impact was, or kind of how, because sometimes it just kind of flows straight into what you're doing and it just kind of adds a bit, but sometimes it kind of throws you completely on a different path. And I was just curious how that was, how that worked on you. Yes. So. I don't know, shall we leave it at that?
I think we should, because there is a lot of things we didn't talk about yet. Like the performances, art group, but perhaps...
we can take that another time. And I like it also that it's fragmented, and as our lives are, so it's perfect. Thank you so much.
Tusen tack, Frido.
Yeah, and goodbye. Thanks again for listening. In closing, if you want to further support the podcast, you can do that in the following ways. First of all, go to thefridoshow.com and you should find everything you need there. But you can also go to iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and any other podcasting platform. Please like, subscribe, and share. That would be a tremendous help. And if there's an opportunity on the platform, you could leave a 5-star review. That would be a huge help as well. Do you have any questions, comments, and/or suggestions? Let me know. Furthermore, on social media, you can follow the podcast at The Frido Show. If you want to follow me personal as well, you'll find me at Frido_Evers. I really appreciate your interest in these art talks, and I hope to welcome you to the next one as well.